Hey everyone, welcome to Pop Culture Pastor, where we look at movies, music, comics, and more from the perspective of faith. Welcome to the show, everyone. This is your self-proclaimed pop culture pastor, Chris Perry. My guest today is my friend Ben Wigdahl, and we're doing something a little bit different today. We'll talk about that in a second, as we're going to be talking about a specific episode of The Simpsons and possibly doing a lot more of that in the future. So welcome to the show, Ben.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going well. You're the second person from your family that's been on here.
My wife.
Yes, your wife Kaylee was part of our Encanto episode, and so we're getting them all.
Yeah.
We'll get your daughters.
I was going to say in a couple of years, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I thought about doing an episode about kids entertainment, and what that has to say.
I know my daughter. She, I also do like a YouTube channel, and she's always jealous when I go record with my other friend. So I'm sure she would love to be either on a podcast or a YouTube thing or whatever. So
yeah, like and subscribe.
Right.
Kids just like finish conversations with that now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
pretty much
great. We love it.
We'll find videos on. She has like a little tablet that she uses, and we'll find these videos that she makes for no one that are just like YouTube stuff, and she's saying all the things. I'm like, I don't know where you even got this from.
Well, probably from YouTube.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Well, Ben is a friend of mine here in Wichita. He's at my church. And as we're going to talk about, we bonded over The Simpsons pretty early. I think like the first time that I preached.
Your first time preaching, you made you think you said Christotunity?
Mm-hmm.
Use that word, and I was like, I don't know if that's just if that was just
Coincidence?
ironic, or coincidental, or if he was a Simpsons fan. And then I asked you afterwards, and sure enough, you were a diehard Simpsons fan.
Yes,
so.
And that is not the first relationship that I formed by someone like, hey, is that a Simpsons reference? So yes, I do like to sneak those into sermons occasionally, if it fits, which it did, and it's subtle. And if you don't know, you don't know.
Right.
But if you do,
I did.
Yes,
I knew.
There you go. So Ben, one of the things we usually start the show with is a little bit of a spiritual bio, kind of how you grew up in faith in church, and a little bit of where you're at now. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I'm a longtime churchgoer. Ever since I was a kid, been going to mostly Baptist churches growing up with my parents and doing that whole thing. Then I went to a big kind of non-denominational for a really long time here in Wichita. And then that one kind of got a little too political, even for my parents. And so they moved to a smaller, again, Baptist one that we went to for most of my like teenage years. And then as I got older, I really kind of just fell away a little bit from church specifically. Stopped going as much as I used to. Really only went to kind of satisfy my parents' wants and desires. So just kind of became a little bit more. I started questioning stuff a lot more, my own beliefs and the things that I saw around me as kind of what I viewed Christianity as becoming. Started to kind of, like I said, question that and to become what I consider more of a agnostic is kind of where I'm at right now with things, where I kind of believe in this higher power, but I kind of don't think that we know everything.
Well, obviously I know everything, but I just haven't taught you all of it yet.
Right. We'll get there someday, maybe, right?
The Simpsons will help.
Right. Well, that's the funny thing is, as I think about it, like, I don't know how much of this is, the whole chicken and egg thing, like how much of it is my personality and my beliefs, kind of how I view The Simpsons and like resonating with it a lot, and how much The Simpsons actually like formed that, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, because I watch, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here that it's kind of me in a nutshell, and I don't know, like I said, if that's how I became that way or if I was just already that way, and this just speaks to that. So, but yeah,
we're drawn to things that connect with us, and they also end up shaping us.
I will say that my Homer in this episode that we're talking about is kind of me. The church that we're going to now here at Westlink is better than any church I've been to.
All right.
and making me want to actually go and be a part of it. Absolutely, by far the most of any church I've gone to, because every other time it was this like, I don't want to go, and any excuse I can get not to go, I will take and gladly, do. So that's kind of it. Just like I said, I don't not atheist, but just kind of still figuring out and questioning stuff still to this day. So,
well, that's all right. We're glad you're here at our church. We're glad you're here today. Now, the other thing we usually start with is some of your earliest pop culture interests, your first fandoms. Aside from The Simpsons, what were some of the things that really got you into pop culture?
So big one. I'm a big video game guy. So grew up playing old Super Nintendo games. So your Mario and Zelda, all that kind of stuff. Those are my big ones. I was also a Seinfeld fan. Is kind of another. Okay. Those are kind of the two shows that I kind of. Simpsons and Seinfeld, I would kind of oscillate between watching complete series of, and then kind of like intersperse Arrested Development in between them. But I would for a good period of time, it was just like I would watch the entirety of the Seinfeld, and then I'd watch the entirety of the Simpsons, and then I'd go back and start with Seinfeld again. So, but yeah, like I said, Mario, Pokemon is also huge in my.
Yeah, you were trying to get me into Pokemon just this week, so that was something that I missed. So I'm giving it a shot. We'll see.
I was the exact perfect age for it. When that came out, I was like 10, which is the age of the kid in the game. So like, Pokemon was a huge part of my growing up life, and it still is. I still play it to this day, and I love it. And all that stuff. So I'd say video games are probably the biggest pop culture kind of touchstone that I really grasped onto
and
early
still
on.
hold on to pretty well.
And I'm very nostalgic. So I go back and find stuff that I used to play or used to like. I love going back and looking at old stuff like that. So yeah, it's good times.
It always is. Well, as we mentioned, this is going to be an episode focused on The Simpsons, and we're going to focus on a specific episode of The Simpsons called Homer the Heretic. But we're also maybe hoping that this can launch a bigger project, another podcast, because obviously I have time to do not just one, but two podcasts right now. But you came up with this title, right, for for what we would do. So you want to talk about what that is and what that means?
Yeah, so I forget exactly even like where it started, but I just thought of the Simp-Sons of God. I mean, it's just the perfect kind of, obviously we were both huge into The Simpsons, and then both are into the spiritual side of things as well. You obviously more so than myself, but I'm there too. I know the references and stuff for the most part on that side of it. So, and just I think it's an interesting. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the episode, but like I think the Simpsons do an interesting and good job of portraying religion and Christianity. They don't go too hard against it, despite the fact that most of the writers I think were pretty much either atheist or agnostic at the very least. But they don't go as hard as a lot of other kind of at the same time sitcoms would go against it. And
or a lot of shows would just ignore it.
Either ignore it or like paint it as this like big evil thing and there's only evil to it. It's like the Simpsons still have some of that like religion is kind of, they don't really, they see it as not necessarily evil, but like there's some bad things about it, but also like the people in it are usually portrayed pretty well. Like Flanders is one of the best people in all of Springfield, and like they don't make him look like a monster or anything like that. So I think they, like I said, they just do an interesting job of taking it in a direction that is not always the way that it goes on television.
That's right. So we are simps for The Simpsons, and we are sons of God, so that's the Simp-Sons of God. So look for this possibly in the future in your podcast feed. We'll let you know on this show if that takes off soon. And so, we're starting with an episode of the show that is more religious focused. It's something they did fairly often. Just them going to church on a regular basis was kind of unique. Like you said, either shows would completely ignore religion, they would be totally down on it. So it's not like Davy and Goliath or VeggieTales or Leave It to Beaver, where it's just obviously totally a good thing, and they have kind of a complex relationship with church and religion, which is kind of the sweet spot of this show. And there's a lot of ways that The Simpsons was unique for its time when it started, late 80s, early 90s. And if you go back in this feed and listen to my episode, Every Thought Captive, I share some of my journey of, it was that show that you weren't supposed to watch if you were a good Christian kid. And there's only a few of us that were allowed to. And it's kind of still like a secret code of like, hey, you watch The Simpsons?
Yeah.
Even though compared to, so many other shows that everyone in the church watches now and is way worse than anything The Simpsons has ever done.
I wasn't allowed to watch it as a 10-year-old. Like I would sneak downstairs and turn it on and then like have my finger on the button ready to go to like the news. Be like, oh, we're just some kids downstairs watching the news, Mom. Nothing going on here, nothing weird. So so it as it slowly. As I got older, obviously my parents figured it out after I was buying the DVD copies of it. It's like, hey, this is a show that I really like, and you're gonna have to get over that.
It's actually not what you think.
And it's not. It's really not as bad as you would think. So,
So we're going to talk about this episode, Homer the Heretic. It's from season 4, episode 3, and our plan today is really just talk through, all the plot, talk about some of the best jokes, some of the memeable moments. I know there's a few scenes in this episode that I see get passed around as GIFs all the time. And we'll also come back at the end and talk about if you want to get into this show, if you were one of those Christian kids who wasn't allowed to watch it, or you just, never have, or maybe you saw an episode that's come out in the last 20 years and is not really a good one. And we're both definitely on the side of the show had maybe 10, 11 good seasons.
I think, like I said, I only own through season 10. Those are the ones that I really cared most about. And then I think for a few years after that, it was okay. And then like post like 13 or 14, it was just like, all right, this is really is now it's not even okay. It's just really not good anymore.
And yet it's still on. So listener, if you are one of the people that still watches The Simpsons, let me know and explain why. I guess I don't understand how it's been going on where the majority of the show now has not really been that great. No. But in its time, it was unique. It was, the first cartoon that wasn't just for kids. And as we're going to see, it was saying something about religion or about other topics. All right, so hopefully I mentioned this in the last episode, and I've posted a little bit about it. So maybe you have already watched this episode like I was hoping you would. And you can follow along as we recap it, but you can also go and watch it. It's all on Disney Plus and other places. Or you can borrow the DVDs from both of us if you're local.
And we got rid of Disney Plus recently, so I only have the DVDs really to go off of now. So.
Classic. So, Ben, what if you want to sum up this episode for us? What's it generally about?
So just Homer doesn't want to go to church. He, kind of wallows in his own self-righteousness, and then
heresy
it ends up turning bad for him, and then religion ends up saving him, I guess.
Okay. So let's get into the episode and see how that works. So it starts, he's in, actually we start with a dream sequence where he's in the womb, baby Homer, and then gets pulled out, and turns out this is just him in bed, and he doesn't want to get out of bed. And I like what Marge says, it's church, you have to go. Right? Like, well, why? Right? There's not a lot of discussion of, well, here's why church is important, here's what church does for you.
Right. It feels very much like what your mom would say. Like, right. I mean, that the vibe I get from Marge is like, well, she just does it because that's what she did her whole life, and it's what her mom did her whole life, and and this is what you do. It's if you want to go to heaven and be a good Christian, you have to go to church, and so that hits that for sure. That momness.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like there's less of that now than there used to be. We both grew up kind of 80s and 90s, and especially before that, it's just kind of assumed this is just what you do. If you're a good person, you go to church, but. Well, why? That's part, I think, of what he's dealing with. But especially because, it's a cold, snowy day.
Yeah.
There's a good transition to like Marge being angry at Homer.
Right. And then it fades into her being in a frosted over car. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Which I love. And then really the first memeable moment of the episode is Homer in bed, wrapped up in his comforter.
Yes. As a toasty cinnamon bun.
Yes. Man, I've felt that and been there. You mentioned some of your struggles growing up, and even now of like, I really don't want to go to church today. This is kind of it's a little different for me because it's my job,
right?
So it's not really up for deciding whether or not I'm going to go today. I kind of have to,
right?
But when it's a snowy day, there's a lot of times a part of me it's like, maybe we should call off church today, protect those old
right,
people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Which is kind of what I thought of as I was watching it. Like, it's, the weather is terrible. Their heat is out at the church building. It's like, we probably would have called off church if this were here.
Right. Yeah, there's polar bears outside. I mean,
wherever Springfield is, it gets polar bears.
Apparently close to the North Pole.
And, so Homer's at home. He's, eventually gets out of bed. The whole process of him like, okay, let's go to the bathroom, and him thinking,
trying to find out how he could do it without. Yes,
it's great. But then you cut to church where Marge and Bart and Lisa and everyone else are, and Reverend Lovejoy is preaching this sermon on Lamentations, which he attributes to Jeremiah. Technically, Lamentations is anonymous. It's associated with Jeremiah because of the time period and setting, the context of the exile, but we don't necessarily know that for sure. So I'm always going to point out where my Bible knowledge corrects the Reverend here. So what else? What does Homer get up to when he's stuck at home?
You can just tell that he's really enjoying it. Really just kind of realizing that he's all by himself. He can pee with the door open, and he can curse if he wants to in the shower, and all this kind of different stuff. He can do his best Tom Cruise risky business impersonation to their favorite, a Simpsons favorite song, the Short Shorts, which I don't even really know what that song is exactly.
It's just some weird 50s who wear short shorts.
It comes up a few times in the Simpsons lore, I believe. But yeah, just doing all the stuff that we imagine is going to be what we would do when we were at home, and then obviously the old moon waffles, which I think it's caramel waffle mix, liquid smoke, and then he wraps it all in butter after he burns it, which. I have here, it's disgusting, but relatable in a way where you're like, I've been at home sometimes, and it's like, well, I have chocolate chips and peanut butter. I can just like melt those together and just like kind of spoon feed myself this melted chocolate chip peanut butter mixture that's almost like Reese's, stuff like that, where it's like, it's not what you're gonna do all the time, but when you're home alone and you're just like, I want something sweet, you kind of just make it as you go.
Yeah. So. I bet you can make those moon waffles and make them pretty good. I wouldn't wrap it around an entire stick of butter.
Go a little bit more. A little more.
Try it. So then you cut back to church, and again, the heat is out, so everyone is freezing, and Reverend is preaching about hell, and so the joke is everyone's like, thinking warm thoughts. Which again, I question.
Positive fire and brimstone.
It'll warm you up a little bit, I guess. But I do question, how did he get there from Lamentations? Because really, in the Hebrew Bible, there is no concept of hell as we think of it. And
I bet he had a great transition that they cut out. He probably had this really awesome one that you would have stolen if you could.
But yeah, we'll see this, like references to hell come up a lot in this, and both in what the preacher is saying and why Homer doesn't love church as much. Although it is interesting, pretty good attendance at First Church of Springfield.
Sure.
They're never clear what denomination. I think maybe Presbyterian, but obviously they're probably leaving that open. Probably wouldn't be the same now. Again, this is early '90s,
right?
So slightly different.
I get the feel as far as like the writer. I watched this regular, without anything, and then I watched it with commentary afterwards. It sounds like most of the writers' room is people who used to be either Catholic or Jewish. Was I think the most common two denominations that were represented in the writers' room. But obviously, I'm sure there were others also.
Yeah. And so the doors are frozen shut when the sermon's finally over, but. So Lisa starts praying the Lord's Prayer. Bart says,
"Neither the time nor the place."
Yes,
I also like that groundskeeper Willie is also apparently the church custodian, because he's the one he's out there doing all the work to try to get the doors open.
Why does the church have an acetylene torch? I don't think we have one of those, but
Willie probably just had that. He probably just
I guess it would have had to be inside if they're frozen in there. There's only one exit, which doesn't seem very safe.
Right.
All right, so Homer's at home, and again having the best day ever, and finally the family gets back, and he tells them, "Okay, I'm never going to church again. I had the best day of my life." And Marge is kind of upset, and she asks, "Are you giving up your faith?" Which the scene is kind of funny, right?
Right.
He's like, "No." But yes, yeah. But again, just the assumption there of going to church equals having faith,
right?
That it's that simple, and I think that's part of what the episode's kind of getting into. Homer gives all these explanations, right? Justifications.
Right. You don't need church to experience God and all that kind of stuff that we've that I have definitely used all those excuses of like, well, this is why I don't need to go to church.
What if we chose the wrong religion and we're just making God more angry?
That's one that I've definitely gone to myself.
That's good. I guess it's all a gamble. Yeah, God is everywhere. I would preach that. That's good theology. Why do we need church?
Also, I like that this conversation is happening while Marge is like cleaning up after Homer's disgusting
the moon
waffles and everything.
Yeah, and so then later in the evening, she's praying for Homer that he'll see the error of his ways. Which I kind of wonder, as I was watching it this time. Obviously, like you have seen all these episodes countless times. It's like, did God answer her prayer? Because he does eventually seem to learn something,
right?
And so, but Homer falls asleep while he's waiting on Marge to finish her prayers, and we meet God.
Yes.
So what's God like?
He's got 5 fingers for one.
That's yeah. All the other characters in the show have 4
fingers. So God has, although at the end scene he only has 4 again. They point out that the director missed that. But he's very very large. Don't see his face at all. He's got a very deep, kind of what you would expect voice.
Very masculine.
He comes in very like, vengeful, wrathful God, and then becomes like immediately down to earth and relatable. Like I feel like that's what one of the things is, like once they start talking, like God's pretty like, oh yeah, like that seems like a good idea. Like I don't know, just very relatable is what I kind of had.
Yeah, a class act all the way. I think is how Homer
good smell.
Yeah, perfect tea.
Perfect tea.
We would hope. Yeah, and so again, Homer is listing the reasons why he's forsaken God's church. Doesn't want to waste a Sunday. And he mentions, the Reverend preaching hell. I don't want to waste a Sunday here and how I'm going to hell. So
right.
It's like he must be hitting that pretty hard, which is not something that I do or think is what we're meant to do. I wonder.
It's probably I would assume that part of it maybe is more like how the writers experienced, how their churches were growing up. Yeah. So I'm sure when they were growing up, it would have been 60s and 70s.
Yeah, I'm
sure. So like. I'm sure they did get some messages that were maybe more like that than we have.
Yeah, and it's really more of a recent thing that we're starting to say, well, maybe that's not the way that we're supposed to be preaching, since that's not what Jesus or the early church did all the time. So maybe that's more of a scare tactic that we've made up. And so Homer's, one of his other justifications is, I'm a hardworking, good guy. And I think that's kind of one of the questions through the episode is, okay, well, is he a good guy? Is he hardworking? Which we see him sleeping at work again. So like, well, okay, I don't know if you're being very honest with yourself. Also, God apparently is a cat person because he pets their family cat, Snowball, too. Yes. I would think, I guess God likes them all because he made them all.
Sure.
But I would think dogs would rate pretty highly, too. All right, so Homer wakes up, and the next scene, he's outside with Lisa, who's, again, questioning him on his heresy.
I like his bathrobe St. Francis look that he has going on.
I know. I wrote, how many robes does Homer have? Because he has at least 2 that he wears through this episode. But yeah, this is obviously a reference to St. Francis of Assisi, who is the patron saint of animals, famously preached to the birds. And Homer's channeling a little bit of that as he's kind of saying he's forming his own religion now.
Yeah.
Which never really gets very well defined. It's again more like an excuse. Well, here's why it's okay that I don't go to church. All right, so
if he's wrong, he'll recant on his deathbed.
Yes,
so
good plan. that joke comes up later, I think, when Bart goes to a revival and the minister there convinced him to get full coverage instead of just the deathbed life insurance. All right, so then the Reverend Lovejoy comes over for dinner, which Marge invited him, and
she has an ulterior motive. I love his reaction to that. Just what? Just very, just quick and like.
I would think you're a reverend of this church, and this person stopped coming. You're not gonna maybe have that conversation with them. And so they start quoting Bible verses at each other. I don't. So the Reverend quotes the passage about the foolish man building his house on the sand. I don't really know what he was getting at with that.
I think just the idea of. If like thinking of God as the rock and the foundation, if he's building his in the Reverend's eyes, I think he's building it based on his own, like Homer's building this religion based on the religion of Homer, which would be a sandy kind of what I mean. I think that's probably what they were getting at. Would be my guess.
And so of course Homer responds by quoting Matthew. What about Matthew 21:17?
And I looked it up, and that is what it says. Yes. I was like, I figured they probably did enough research. I mean, it's not that hard to research that, but I did look it up, and it was.
Yes, just a random verse about Jesus going out to Bethany. Although I looked at the context too, and this is a scene in the Gospels. It's right after Jesus has cleared the temple. He's done this thing that upset the religious establishment. He's disrupted the place of worship for people. And it's really not safe for him to stay in Jerusalem, so he goes to Bethany to probably stay with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. That's where they live.
Maybe it does tie in a little bit there.
Yeah, it could. Again, this is probably giving the writers too much credit.
Right.
But okay, there's a little bit of a comparing to Jesus and him upsetting the religious establishment, the authorities, and doing things differently. And is Homer doing the same thing? Well, probably not. So then Homer starts explaining, he starts telling everyone else about his new religion, like his bartender Mo, who refuses to join his new religion because born a snake handler, you die a snake handler.
That was my other memeable moment. Him with his hands full of snake bites.
Right, which I was thinking about it. If he's been clearly bitten by snakes a lot, but he's still okay, I'm okay.
There's something to it.
There's something to it,
right.
Unless they're just not using venomous snakes.
Right.
Now, this idea of snake handling comes from the ending of Mark's Gospel. According to most scholars, though, this section of Mark is a longer ending that is not original to what Mark himself probably wrote. Mo, unfortunately, is basing his religion on a unreliable text that made its way in the New Testament. And so then we start seeing other people that are trying to pull Homer back to church, including the Flanders.
Right.
And I think this is yet another memeable moment where they're standing in the doorway and Ned has a guitar.
Right.
See people quote, we'll use that clip with a line from a Rage Against the Machine song.
Okay.
I won't diddly do what you tell me. So the Flanders, this is the super churchy family, right? Who are generally good people still, but kind of annoying.
Yes.
They're trying to convince Homer, church can be fun too.
Right.
So they start singing this song about Noah's Ark, about this flood that kills almost everybody on the earth, right? What's not fun? What's not to love about that?
And there's not. I mean, if you know Homer Simpson and their family, like there's nothing that is going to appeal to him less than the idea of walking around with his family singing church songs door to door. Like that is not the Simpsons at all.
Yeah. It's not me either.
No.
Well, we're a cappella in our tradition, so we don't allow that at all. No fun. Now Homer is trying to the main person through the episode that he's justifying this to is Marge, right, his wife, because it's having an effect on their family. You have experienced this as a minister where you have a family where only one parent goes to church, and it just kind of makes things complicated.
Right. Because
what do you teach the kids, and how do you get the kids to come to church if one parent's staying home? And obviously they're probably going to want to stay home too. But Homer, to justify it here, he starts talking about, another person.
Kids, let me tell you about another so-called wicked guy. He had long hair and some wild ideas, and he didn't always do what other people thought was right. And that man's name was... I forget. But the point is... I forget that too. Marge, you know who I'm talking about. He used to drive that blue car.
Is clearly describing Jesus. Obviously, he's talking about someone in their life, not Jesus. I have here that is a classic Simpsons misdirect kind of joke, like where they start you off one way and then they just take a right turn and subvert expectation.
As far as we know, Jesus did not drive a blue car.
We don't. Well, you never know.
Ancient Galilee. It's causing more problems. He's staying home. They're going to church. The sermon title seems to be When Homer Met Satan, so it's very clearly against him.
They love their jokes on the church marquees.
Yes, which we do too. Ben, I've kind of tasked him with doing the sign, so yeah, it is fun.
Maybe I'll do that one someday.
Yeah. Who do you want to call out as having met Satan?
Probably me. I mean, honestly, of all the people in our church.
So then Homer starts to meet other people from other walks of life, other religions. Krusty the Clown shows up, who famously in the show is Jewish, and he's collecting for Jewish clowns who have been affected by tornadoes. So it's the Brotherhood of Jewish Clowns who've been unfortunately affected by a tornado. But Homer doesn't want to help him, right? He's like, oh, this is a religious thing, and
a religious clown thing, yes.
so he slams the door in his face. So Homer, not really much of a good guy there. And then he goes to the Quickie Mart
to get some snacks and I think beer and his whole thing, and meets Apu, who is Hindu. And it's always kind of hard to watch some of those older. How they handle Apu is not maybe the most graceful in all ways.
Yep,
kind of. I mean, this whole episode they kind of mock Hindu. He kind of tells him that he got the bottom of the barrel of the bargain bin. When they were handing out gods, all that kind of stuff, and so kind of just like I said, being not great to all the other religious people that he's coming across.
And there's also a little bit of Christian assumptions working in, like, why aren't you at church on a Sunday? Like,
right.
Well, I don't think they have the same sort of go to church on this one day of the week. I don't know enough about the Hindu religion, but yeah, that's just assuming. Well, obviously you would worship like I do, and you're not doing that, so you must not have a religion. So yeah, Homer doesn't seem like the good guy he claims. He refuses to help the poor. He insults other religions. And then once he gets back home, we get the memeable moment where he's got a cigar in his mouth and he says, "Everyone is stupid except me."
Now, I do like right before that he's looking at the Play Dude magazine, and I feel like most sitcoms from that era would have taken the obvious jokes for a guy looking at a Playboy, but like the joke here is that he's like reading the articles, and that always cracks me up.
He reads one, he's like, well, that's no good, and then here's the good stuff, and then it's some other.
But it's still just reading. Like, I mean, I don't. I guess I never really
about an interview with somebody.
I feel like just kind of like I feel like Married with Children would have had a much different joke there.
It would just be looking at the naked ladies.
Right, exactly.
So Homer, who thinks everyone is stupid except for him, falls asleep with a cigar lit and with
alcohol everywhere around him.
And
alcohol soaked.
This inevitably sets his house on fire. It's not helped by the fact that there are boxes labeled oily rags and blasting caps.
I never noticed the blasting caps until this watch.
You don't have a box of blasting caps?
I don't.
In your
Maybe
garage,
not yet.
Yeah. And so he's asleep, but then eventually he wakes up and everything's on fire while the family again is at church. And he's trying to remember what to do. He's trying to remember some song.
Which I don't know that. I couldn't finish it for him when he was singing it out loud.
I wonder if they just made it up. It's like, is it just stop, drop, and roll?
Right, that's all I know.
That's what we learned.
I never learned a song about that, but apparently Homer
didn't need much more.
Right.
And so then Homer passes out from smoke inhalation, I guess. And who saves the day but
Ned
Flanders?
Skipping church.
That when we watched it together the other day, it's like, wait, why wasn't Ned at church? Is this a goof? And so I think we're just going to have to assume that
church was getting out and he just got home
he came home quickly. Although to me, Ned seems like the type of
who
person
would stick around.
Stay. He'd have lots of questions for the Reverend.
For sure.
Things that were wrong with his sermon.
Or at the very least, talking to everyone at church and be the last person there.
Not the first one home, or volunteering, doing something.
Maybe he saw the smoke. He's like, hey, let me go. Opportunity to help.
God sent him there. God told him. Maybe
because the smoke was pretty big. Like the firefighters saw it from way far away. So
we've got the volunteer fire department, which includes the chief of police for some reason.
The barfly, Barney's in there.
Mm-hmm.
I think I saw Mole Man. I think Mole Man's on there as well.
Okay. Millhouse's mom with him. So kind of a weird group. I would think Springfield, it seems like the big enough city to have its own actual fire department. But
really, now that I think of it really isn't a stereotypical firefighter character in The Simpsons. Really, that's weird. I never really thought of that. But
there you go. So that's why they can't afford it. But Flanders still is the first one there, but before the fire department comes, and so he's really the one that saves Homer.
Right.
He can't get out the front door because things keep falling, and so he takes him upstairs, throws the mattress outside.
The next memeable moment.
He prays and guide Homer to this mattress straight and true. I think,
and he does. He guided him right to the mattress.
Right. He did hit the mat. Yeah. So God answered that prayer. Homer does fall on the mattress, but then bounces immediately right back into the house through the window. And I just love Flanders like,
Yeah.
okay. And he jumps and does this
Like somersault. Yeah.
So again, it's like, all right, that prayer technically was answered, but
Right.
if
Didn't
that
work out the way.
yeah, maybe God was maybe not being the nicest if that's what's happening here. But then Homer's rescued, and he sees, everyone that's here to help him, and he's like, Flanders, why'd you help me? I'm like, oh, you do the same for me, right?
No. He's just a picture or a thought bubble of Ned Flanders in his home, screaming for help with the fire, and Homer just out on a hammock, like sipping beer and
Laughing
ignoring him and laughing. Yeah, exactly.
So again, Homer, is he really a good guy? I mean, again, maybe this is just his imagination in the moment, might be different, but not really following the golden rule here, which is pretty basic. We have some nice chopping.
Yeah,
by
Barney chopping the mailbox for no reason.
And the question of that someone brings up, well, is this an act of God? And then Flanders' house catches on fire.
Yeah, Homer questions, well, if God exists, then why is didn't save Ned's house, and then immediately is answered by a single cloud raining and a rainbow over his house.
Yeah. Although that idea comes back later in the episode Hurricane Nettie, where the Flanders house is the only one that's destroyed in an act of God. And so that is they're continuing to have this conversation through the series. So Homer seems to have, in a sense, realized something, or maybe he takes the wrong lesson, as he often does, that here he concludes, well, the Lord is vengeful and just needs to know, okay, who do I need to smite so that God will not be mad at me anymore.
So even when we get down to it, kind of Homer's takeaway is still not the one that he should have taken away. That's not really what was to be learned.
I was
there.
wrong. I need to be more mean to other people in God's name instead of. And so it's Flanders who comes back in and actually I think has some pretty good theology here. He says, no, God, that's not what God does. God doesn't set people's houses on fire to teach them a lesson, which is very much in line, I think, with what Jesus does when he encounters a man who's born blind, and people are like, well, who sinned? He says, no, it's not that. Jesus is able to recognize that bad things happen, and we don't just want to chalk it up to God trying to teach lessons or punish people all the time. And then the Reverend has some pretty good ecumenical theology.
Homer, God didn't set your house on fire.
No, but he was working in the hearts of your friends and neighbors when they went to your aid, be they Christian, Jew, or miscellaneous.
Hindu. There are 700 million of us.
Oh, that's super.
Right. It's not just Christians that saved you. It's Christian, Jewish, or miscellaneous, which once again. Yeah. But here's the thing about that joke specifically. I actually think that's really funny. In that the way that I perceive that is, I don't see that as a slight against Apu and his religion. I see that as Reverend Lovejoy is just really ignorant, and I thought that's always how I've seen it. Is that like this guy who thinks he's this godly person is kind of being this arrogant and ill-informed person who is very dismissive. Oh, that's super. You have 700 million of you, like all this stuff, and I do think that it could be taken a wrong way. But I the way that I always read it was not as a slight towards the Hindu religion, but more as like showing that people on the other side of it are maybe the ones who are in the wrong in that.
Christians very often have very little knowledge of other religions, and so that's super.
Yeah.
I do like the delivery of that line, though. So Homer does sort of admit, I've been a jerk. He admits his rudeness. So there's we would call that repentance.
Sure.
And so he vows to be in church next Sunday.
Right. And he is. Once again.
But he's asleep at church.
Right.
Which, again, I've been a preacher plenty, and I have seen people that nod off a little bit. But,
He gets to see God one more time, though.
That's right.
They have to have a little last one-on-one with God before they set out. And some things that I had for I just like the Franklin and Hendricks air hockey game that's going on up there.
Mm-hmm. That's what we do. Yeah, that's what you do in heaven. You get to play air hockey with celebrities.
Right. And then just his final conversation with God and being not being able to wait 6 months. Homer's apparently supposed to die in 6 months. And then obviously they kind of end it with the meaning of life is, and then blank, and then just kind of
don't get the answer.
Right.
Sorry, people.
They love that.
Yeah. All right. So that's Homer the Heretic, a great classic episode. Now, one of the things that we're going to do every week, if I'll say when instead of if, when we make this a regular series, is Reverend Chris is going to bring you a Simp sermon. So I'm going to pull a Bible verse out of thin air and make some connection with whatever episode we're watching, which, this one's a little easier since it's a religious episode.
Right.
We'll see how it goes when it's a
Right.
totally random episode. But, this is a skill every preacher has to have, is be able to tie something back and make a sermon out of it. So the verse that I obviously thought of is from Hebrews 10, verses 24 and 25. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. So I've seen this verse, I've heard this verse used a lot. Don't forsake the assembly, as in when it's time for church, you need to be at church. And so it's a sin to forsake that group. And that question never really gets answered too well of, well, what is the point of church? Right? It's just, well, just go.
Right.
But I think with this verse, actually, if you read the whole context, it's saying that the purpose of gathering together as believers is to encourage each other, to spur one another towards love and good deeds, and to give each other encouragement. And, so if you avoid the, like some are in the habit of doing, which sounds very Reverend Lovejoy, we do need other people to encourage us to do good, to show love. Homer claims that he's a good guy without any sort of, religious community, and it really doesn't seem like that's the case.
Right.
And so a community is ideally not a place where we are, given a healthy dose of fear every week, but we are encouraged to be people who show love. And, hopefully that's what your church is. If it's not, maybe that's not the best kind of community. But if it's spurring you towards love and good deeds, I think that's something we don't want to skip unless it's, I guess, really cold. But as we finish up this episode of Pop Culture Pastor, we want to do our typical ending where we talk about our pop culture consolations and desolations. This is where we list something that's been life-giving in pop culture, something we recommend, and then maybe also something that's not life-giving that you don't recommend, or something that's just getting you down a little bit. And these don't obviously have any spiritual connection necessarily. So, Ben, what's your pop culture consolation for this week?
Okay, so I was thinking about this, and I'm going outside the box on this a little bit. The consolation is, so for me, and I acknowledge that maybe I go too far into this mode. I'm a big nostalgia guy. I'm a big believer of finding the things from your childhood that made you happy, and they'll make you happy again today. Yeah. And so my consolation is actually to not find something new, is to go back and find something that you remember, like The Simpsons. For me, is like such a childhood memory of watching The Simpsons, and going back to it now, some of that comes back. It holds up really well, so that helps. But that definitely is like a thing that I am drawn to. So my consolation would be for you to go and find something from your past and find it. And even if it's not easy to find, like find a way to experience it, find a way to interact with it again. Whether it's, finding a song on Spotify that you haven't listened to for 15 years, or finding an old video game cartridge and actually playing it on your whatever it is. My consolation is go find something from your childhood that brought you a lot of joy, and see what that brings out of you today.
All right, well, kind of on that note, my consolation is related to something that I was into in middle school, and that is Weird Al. So we just watched the movie Weird, the Al Yankovic story, which is streaming on the Roku channel. Kind of weird. Maybe that's the point. So if you don't know, this is a fake biopic about the life of Weird Al Yankovic, starring Daniel Radcliffe as Al. And of course, he, since it's Weird Al, he's not going to actually tell you his life story. And just making fun of the story beats that you see in pretty much every one of those movies of, the abusive dad and the quick rise to fame and all these things. So yeah, there was a lot of fun stuff in it. It's not the first movie to kind of do this exact thing, but it was a lot of fun, especially if you like Weird Al. Seeing Daniel Radcliffe just kind of also make some weird choices after Harry Potter is always great. He's also strangely jacked for this movie, which I don't know if
is
he
Weird
did
Al
that.
jacked? Is that a thing about Weird Al?
He's pretty healthy. He's vegan, but yeah, I don't think of him being super muscly. And so it follows the same beats of most biopics. There is a really it goes off the rails at the end, which I kind of liked. I wasn't expecting that part of it. So it's a lot of fun, especially if you like Weird Al's music, and of course, kind of like what you were talking about. That's made me go back and watch like Gangster's Paradise and some of those that were just the funniest thing in middle school, because I think most of us went through that phase. But who doesn't love Weird Al?
Right.
So Ben told me before they didn't have any desolations aside from just the state of the world, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Which is why we like pop culture, because it helps us escape those things. My desolation this week is Mimi Parker was a member of the band Low, and she just passed away this week. This is a band that's been around since the 90s, and I actually hadn't listened to them a whole lot. But they've had a couple albums recently where they've kind of changed their sound, and their album that came out last year called Hey What was one of my favorites of 2021. And she was only 55 and died of cancer, so that just kind of felt like a big loss. So I'm going to play a clip of a song here that she sings on. She was the drummer in this band. The song is called More, and it's pretty intense. I think people point out this is probably her processing the diagnosis that she had gotten, and this song is probably responding to. So let's hear a little bit of this song.
I saw more than what I ever saw. I should have asked for more than what I
All right, so that was the song More by the band Low. Well, Ben, that's the end of our show. Thanks for being with us today. I look forward to talking more about The Simpsons. I mean, we talk about it all the time, but I guess talking about it more, with microphones.
More formal setting.
All right. Well, we will definitely be talking again soon. Thanks for being here today. Well, as we close this show, we want to think again about what it means to be a good person. Is it about being in a church building every Sunday, or is it about how we love our neighbors? As Homer learned in our episode today, it's about caring for those in need, no matter who they are or where they come from or what they believe. And so whatever you believe about podcasts or podcasting, today you have an opportunity to love your neighbor, me, by sharing this podcast. Tell your friends, like and subscribe, leave a review. No matter where you are, this is how you can be a blessing. This show is produced by me, Chris Perry, the pop culture pastor. Thanks again to Ben Wigdahl for being with me. If you like what we did here today, you can actually already go and subscribe to the Simp-Sons of God podcast or follow us on Instagram. And of course, you can find more Pop Culture Pastor content on Facebook and Instagram at Pop Culture Pastor. Our theme music is Be Thou My Vision from the 8-Bit Hymnal by Mr. Tyler Larson. Next time, we're going to start doing our end of the year episodes. So we'll have separate episodes talking about music, books, and TV and movies. So stay tuned for those in a couple of weeks. You are now dismissed. Go in peace.